Are you a sewist who often finds yourself too tired to sew? Well, you're not alone. Me too, my friend. Me too. I'm Jennifer Wiese, founder of Workroom Social and Camp Workroom Social. And at Workroom Social, we teach adults how to sew clothes that fit their unique styles and their individual body shapes and sizes. And even though sewing is my profession, I have to admit that I am not the world's greatest sewist. I am also not the premier expert in sewing. In fact, I am still learning a lot of the same things that you are. And in this series, Dear Jenny, I'm super excited to talk with you and together answering your sewing-related thoughts and questions for a discussion around how together we can grow both as sewists and as people. So let's get into it. What do we have in today's letter? Dear Jenny, I keep seeing all of these amazing sewing projects on Instagram, and there's a long list of sewing patterns I want to make. But whenever I get home from work, I'm exhausted and I can't seem to find the energy to be creative. How will I ever finish a sewing project if I can't even muster up the energy to start? From a lethargic sewist. Raise your hand if you can relate to this letter from a lethargic sewist. I know I can. And in fact, for 3, 4, maybe more years in a row, my New Year's resolution was always the same thing, and that was to sew clothes for myself. And each new year, I promised myself that I was gonna find the energy to sew clothes for myself, even though I never did for years and years and years. I have to admit, I'm still not a high output sewist, and embracing this fact was probably one of the best things I could have done for myself. Thinking back to the first episode of Dear Jenny, our value is not tied to our output. And once I gave myself permission to not sew things, even though I identify as a sewist, I actually found myself more excited to sew things. Our hobbies should be fun, creative outlets for ourselves. And looking back, I now realize that I was putting way too much pressure on myself. I was treating my hobby like it was my job. Which, to be fair and to give myself some credit, when the two things are so closely linked, that can be a little hard. So now going back to our letter from a lethargic sewist, I would like for us to all recognize that it is okay to be tired, and it is okay for us to veg out and not be productive if that's what we need to do. Creativity is a form of problem solving. It requires using your brain. And if you've just spent a long day at work, thinking critically, solving problems, using a lot of your brain power, well, by the time you get home, it might not be the best idea to jump right into a project that is also going to require a lot of your brain power. I also find that my creative energy can ebb and flow depending on the time of year or month. At the start of every new season, I find myself excited and energized to make things, but as the season wears on, especially those long winters, I can find myself less excited to make things or sew things for myself. Before we talk about ways to find more creative energy, I would love it if we could all let go of any guilt we might be holding about being sewists who perhaps aren't sewing right now. And let's stop comparing ourselves to others on Instagram. When we see people sharing their makes on social media, and if we feel some of those negative feelings starting to bubble up, those feelings of comparison, I want us to instead celebrate those makers, recognizing that they are in their season of making and we are just on a different sewing calendar. Okay, let's talk about finding our creative energy. So, a lethargic sewist writes, whenever they get home from work, they're exhausted and they can't seem to find the energy to be creative. And they are right. Being creative does take energy. However, it can give us energy too. And in fact, it can help refuel us to tackle other different areas of our lives. In fact, many consider sewing and other hobbies like this to be forms of self-care. To help drive our search for the energy to sew, I think it's really helpful to define why we want to sew. Why do we want to be creative in this way? Is it because we want to have a relaxing evening at home after work? Are we looking for an outlet to express ourselves? Do we want an opportunity to learn something new, something different, and stretch our minds or maybe our motor skills in some way? Are we looking for the chance to sew clothes that actually fit our bodies? Or maybe we want to just prove to ourselves that we have other abilities besides sending emails. That was a big one for me in the beginning because taking fabric and turning it into something you can wear feels like such a huge accomplishment. When I'm feeling too tired to work on a personal project, I like to think about and remind myself of why I want to do this thing. And sometimes reminding myself of why I want to do something gives me enough energy to get up off the couch and sat down at my sewing machine. And remember, like the seasons, our reasons for wanting to sew can change over time. So it's nice to revisit this question every so often, or maybe even project to project. Once we're confident about the reason we want to sew, I find it super helpful to pinpoint when we naturally are most inclined to do creative work. A lethargic sewist writes that they are exhausted after work. So, sewing after work might not be the best time for them to do these kinds of projects. It might be better for them to work on their creative hobbies in the morning before work, or maybe only on their days off. It's also helpful to figure out how your creative energy works while you're sewing. Are you more productive and happier if you are tackling your project in small 15 or 20-minute chunks? Or do you find yourself more satisfied when you're sitting down for 5 hours at a time and working on something the whole way through? If you're not sure when and how you sew the best, I hope you'll try a bunch of different combinations of times and durations and take notes while you're doing this. Make sure you take note of how you're feeling during the session and after the session. Write it down so you can go back and reflect on how each session worked for you. You might discover you work best under a situation that you've never tried before. A few years ago, I read the book called Daily Rituals, Women at Work, and it was eye-opening to me to see how all of these different people had different systems of work, from working really early in the morning to really late at night, a little bit each day, or once a week, or once a month, or maybe they locked themselves in a room and never left. But whatever their system was for their creative endeavor, they figured out what worked for them, and it was just a great reminder that there is no one universal way that is best for us to unleash our creative energy. We can all have our own unique systems and all be equally successful. Now, figuring out what system is going to give us the most creative energy is going to take time. But the good news is the more energy we put in, the more energy we are going to get out of it. Except that a lethargic sewist writes, "How will I ever finish a project if I can't even muster up the energy to start?" A lethargic sewist can't even get started. Well, I do have some good news on that front, and that is that getting started is really the hardest part. So I feel confident that if we can figure out how to get started, I know we'll figure out how to finish. So let's talk about some different strategies to help us take those first steps towards working on our projects. First, figure out the smallest next step to make progress on your project and commit to doing just that teeny tiny thing. Often taking those first steps, that very first next step can be the hardest thing. And once you take that one step, it is so much easier to keep the momentum going and to continue making progress. So let's identify a teeny tiny thing that we can commit to doing on whatever project we're working on. So that could be washing your fabric. It could be sewing a dart, pinning a seam. It could be cutting out one singular pattern piece. Or, if you're feeling really low energy, it could be to just simply go into your sewing space and stand there for a few minutes. After you do the tiny, tiny thing that you've committed to doing, ask yourself how you're feeling. If you feel like, you've made that first step and you feel like you can keep taking steps forward, then that's amazing. Continue working on your project. But if you've taken that first step and you are still feeling tired and just not into it right now, give yourself permission to go do something else. Try to start every sewing session by committing to just doing this one small, tiny thing, and hopefully that will help you get started more often. Next, Rosie. Well, we have a visitor. Little Miss Rosie decided to join me on the couch here, and I feel like people liked her in a previous episode. I'm not sure which one. No, episode 2. So I'm going to leave her here. I hope that's okay. I do think she's cute. Okay, where were we? Next, let's reduce decision overwhelm by breaking down big choices into lots of little choices, by making those choices one at a time, and by not second guessing ourselves. I don't know about you, but I feel like sewing as a hobby is one of a gazillion choices that need to be made. And making all those choices can really stress me out and make me feel overwhelmed. And gosh golly, if I make one wrong choice, I'm gonna ruin the entire project. That is not actually what happens, but that is how it can feel sometimes. So at the start of each project, instead of asking myself the big question of, what do I want to make? I instead break that down into several smaller questions or several smaller decisions that I have to make. The first thing I ask myself is, do I want to make something that I want or that I need? Next, I ask myself, how long do I want to spend on this project? Or another way to think about that is, how quickly do I want to finish this project? And the third thing I ask myself is, do I want an easy win or do I want a challenge? And pro tip, if I'm feeling the way a lethargic sewist is feeling, like I don't have a lot of energy, oftentimes I'll go for that easy win, because racking up those easy wins can help boost my morale and give me more energy and make me more excited for projects down the road. From there, I have 3 more questions that I ask myself. I ask, what kind of garment do I want to make? How and where will I wear this garment? And last, how do I want this garment to fit me? After answering all of those questions, and usually in that order, I should have enough information to help me find a sewing pattern and fabric so that I can get started on my next project. And once I make those decisions, I don't look back. I don't second guess myself. I continue making steps forward and I save all of my decision-making energy for after I start, when inevitably I mess up and will need to use my decision-making to help solve my sewing mistakes. And last, create a system of gentle accountability. Whether that's scheduling a monthly Zoom session with your sewing friends, using a habit tracker on your phone, or maybe rewarding yourself with a series of treats for making progress. It can be really helpful to use accountability systems to help us achieve what we want. Sewing is our fun hobby and we love doing it. But just like other things that we love and that are good for us, it can oftentimes be, a lot easier to do nothing than to do the thing that we love. So let's hack our human brains and use some incentives to get us sitting at our sewing machines. Let's all remember that sewing should be fun. It's a hobby that we all love, and if we're not feeling up for it right now, that is absolutely okay. I know the kind of pressure and guilt we can feel when we see our sewing friends posting all of their beautiful creations online. When those feelings of comparison start to bubble up, I want us to remember and be excited for our online sewing friends who are clearly currently in their season of sewing. And we are simply on a different sewing calendar. I know there are a lot of energetic sewists watching. What advice do you have for a lethargic sewist? I can't wait to hear about all of the ways you've developed your own personal sewing practice. If there's something sewing related that you'd love to chat about, you can send your letter to me at hello@workroomsocial.com or leave a comment below. Thank you so much to Seamwork, and I can't wait to see you on the next episode of Dear Jenny. Bye for now. Special message for a lethargic sewist. I don't sew much for myself. I am like you. I'm finished with work and I'm very tired. But sometimes inspiration strikes, and when you feel it, you just gotta go with it. And that happened to me very recently in the last 2 weeks, and I made this beautiful dress that I'm wearing right now because I listened to my intuition and I paid attention to my energy and I just rode that wave. And now, anytime I start to think about making something else, I get very stressed out and go watch television. So, you're not alone. I hope you can't hear Rosie snoring or breathing while she's sitting here. I might have to go review this footage right now. But she's so cute, I can't tell her no. Little Rosie. Also, in case you didn't know, she's deaf. So, oh, did you feel that? Did you feel me moving? She didn't care. Didn't care at all. Boop.